everyone. Thank you all for coming this beautiful weekend of summer. And we're going to be today talking about the Spiritist Magazine. And there's a lot of information from the Spiritist Magazine, as you guys will see. But before we start, I'm going to invite Fabio to come here and do the lecture and the prayer for us. And then I'll get started with the lecture right after that. Okay?
From the book Happy Life, from Develop Pereira Franco by Jonah Janus. Bad thoughts poison the soul. They attract pessimism and the sickening presence of bad and disturbed spirits. Keep in mind on positive, illuminating ideas and ennobling actions that will provide inner well-being and the joy of living. What you think about incessantly will eventually come to pass. Facts are first embodied in the mind and then become reality in the physical body. Think good thoughts and bathe yourself in the light of love. So let's now put our thoughts on God, on Master Jesus. Let's elevate those thoughts. Bring them harmony. So we could get inspired by the lectures today and by all the knowledge that Marco will share with us. May the spirits guide us today and that we could use the things we learned to our lives. So be it.
All right, so welcome everyone again. And today we're going to be talking about the Spiritist Magazine. And interestingly, most people would remember quite easily if I ask you what are the basic books that Kardec wrote. There are the core elements of Spiritism. I think everyone would probably be able to bring the name of the books, right? Starting from Spirit's book, and then the Gospel, Medium's book, actually, the Genesis. I think, in general, those are well known, and there's obviously a lot of information on those books. But at the same time, interesting enough, I think most people would not consider other sources of information, for example, the posthumous works and the Spiritist Magazine. And they were all done at the same time, around the same time, right? And also very interesting to that point is that a lot of the information that ended up being the core of those books started as communications that were described in the Spiritist Magazine. So it's a more like real-time publication, right? That was designed to allow this direct communication between all the Spiritists and Kardec and being disseminated quite quickly, right? Even before they made into the basic books of Spiritism. Now, also very interesting about that is that remember that time I guess you guys will think about this with me. There's no blogs, right? No internet, no Twitter, no Facebook, or So dissemination of information was very different, extremely different from what it is today. Right? So if we wanted to come up with a new concept, for example, in science, right? So we would have to, first of all, somehow present that to the societies that were somehow regulating that knowledge. For example, if I have a new scientific evidence of something, I would go to the scientific society and I would make a pitch or present that, and I'll show the elements that support that. And eventually that would get published into the manuscript of the society, and then would established as a fact. And then people would question, like, in science, like what we do. For us to come up with a book, like for example, the Spirit's book, we're talking about a lot of work for a long period of time. So maybe by the time that book reaches someone, that information might be already not up to date because there's a lot of things that are happening at the same time, right? So the Spiritist Magazine comes exactly to that little niche, right? So think about this, Kardec. Can you guys imagine how many letters Kardec was receiving like on a daily basis when he started this? One, two, hundreds, thousands? Because there was no email, right? He did not have an assistant triaging things for him. Well, his wife, obviously, Emily, was helping him a lot at that time. But they were, and if you look at if you watch the movie, I think you got an interesting perspective of that because you see some scenes of the movie, you see him sitting on his living room, basically surrounded by letters up to the roof, and that's pretty much a good imagery to represent what's going on. He had to read all through that. He communicated and replied to all those letters, right? But then let's say that a spiritist somewhere in the world would write a letter and say, you know, this is what happened to us. We received this communication, this spirit, this, or that, and how do I know if this is real, right? So you write to Kardec, right? So Kardec would read it and say, well, you know, we've had this experience again, and you know that makes sense. But sometimes we've learned from that experience too, right? Because everything was happening at the same time. So Kardec said, you know, how do I inform people, but all of them at the same time? Because if I reply letters one to one, that's not efficient, right? Because the information will be only to that particular individual that received the letter. So that's where he consulted with the spirits, and he asked, you know, how about we create, well, and at that time it's more like a journal of the Spiritist communications, which is he called of the psychological studies, right, based on Spiritism. That's how it started. Where in this review Spiritist Magazine, he would be able to publish letters, replies, studies, examples, and in a much more dynamic and user-friendly way, right? So anyone could open a magazine, just we open magazines today, and the information is very easy to spot, easy to digest and to read. And that was the idea. Now, why am I saying all this? Because you may find surprising that the amount of information contained in the Spiritist Magazine is so enormous in reach that there's actually, I'm going to show you this, guys. So this book alone, entire book, is just the index of the information contained in the Spiritist Magazine publications from 1858 to 1869. So all this, and I'll show you here, all of this are actually all the letters and topics and themes that are described in the Spiritist Magazine just during that time that Kardec was editing it, right? And again, just think about it one more time. Can you imagine how much information there's here? And now I'm going to ask you, how many of us had a chance to read the Spiritist Magazine? Fantastic, one, right? Good, yeah. So I have to say, I did read parts of it. I did not read all of it, right? And I think we're the same page. Thank you. I was like, oh boy. You know, it's and it's a type of information that's not really accessible to all. And even if it is, I don't think many of us will have the insight of saying, you know, let me see what's in here and let's think about this, right? And the reason why I would highly suggest you guys doing this, because the way the Spiritist Magazine is written, it's extremely easy to read. So if you guys, let's say, if you guys want to pick a book to start, let's say, you know, let's say you want to read Genesis, for example, right? Even after you read all the books, if you haven't had all the books and the Media's book and, you know, and the Gospel, when you start reading Genesis, you may find it quite difficult in the beginning because it's an interesting connection between science, historical facts, psychological studies, and spiritism, kind of linking all of it together, right? To explain, for example, the creation, right, of us, of the universe, planet. If you look at the Spiritist Magazine, there's actually many of the communications that are also contained as the base of that book are actually described here and can help us, right, digest some of that information. right? It's very important. I would read both of them at the same time, like if you have a chance to. Okay. Now, going back to the time where the original Spiritist magazine was written, right? So from 58 to 69. This is the time where the Parisian Society, the Spirit Society, was actually founded, 1858. So the Parisian Society was founded a few months after the Spiritist magazine was first published. It was actually January 1858, and then the Parisian Society in April 1858. Now, why is that interesting also? Because all the documents of the Parisian Society are actually published in the Spiritist magazine too. So you have access, for example, to their meetings, the agendas and the descriptions of the meetings and what they've decided. And it's interesting because it's a beautiful snapshot of how challenging it was, to start something extraordinarily new in a time that people were not really accepting much of that, right? So it is, and I think if you watch the movie again, it kind of shows brief moments, but it showed brief moments of how challenging it was to overcome, the overall view of the society against that particular movement in Spiritism. Also in the Spiritist magazine, you're going to find something that I find probably one of the most interesting facts about the Spiritist magazine is Kardec allowed replies, just like in a scientific journal, for example. When someone publishes something and you have a strong belief that there are some issues with that, you can actually write a letter to the editor. And you write a letter to the editor saying, "Dear editor, I thank you for this publication. I find this to be quite difficult to comprehend. We've had different experience." And you write a letter kind of challenging that idea, right? Just to show you how Kardec was committed to beliefs in scientific approach to things and rationalized approach. He actually published those letters in the Spiritist magazine, and he replied to them line by line. So it's also interesting because you can gain a lot of information reading about people that do not believe in what you believe, right? Because if you're inside the bubble such a point that you can't really hear people that complain or make concerns about what you believe, then you're in trouble, right? Because we should have a completely open-minded, completed, rationalized faith, right? That you wouldn't have trouble discussing with anyone about your faith, right? So he shows that. And some of the letters are very interesting because they come from eminent scientists at the time. And they provide a very detailed explanation of why they believe what's going on is actually not true, right? And you have examples. For example, if you go in that same time, you had people that obviously abused the movement, and some people, would actually make shows out of the manifestation of the spirits, and sometimes those were not even real, right? And there were moments like that. Kardec was obviously realizing what was real and not real. That's exactly what he was doing, right? But some people would take, for example, the charlatan, someone that's like faking everything, was presenting somewhere. Like people would take that example to say that the entire Spiritist movement is based on myths and it's not real, right? It's just fake. So Kardec would take the time to explain the differences between what's real, what's not real, what was happening. For example, when the tables were moving, you guys can possibly imagine that, yes, tables were moving for a good reason in a specific period of time. They don't move anymore because we don't need them to really move anymore, right? The spirits are very clear about that. But at the same time, there were people moving tables that were actually not based on Spiritist movements, right? That still happens today, right? If you know a very good illusionist, like someone that can actually create illusions through our minds, they can make a lot of things appear and disappear and move and make sound. That's easy to do if you have the right tools to do it. Right? So Kardec had to challenge that entire thing too, because he was coming up with something that was based on this very unusual phenomenon that was happening all over Europe at that time, and even the United States, right? And at the same time, he had this competing branch of people kind of faking that. See how challenging that is? It is very difficult, right? So he was able to write all those letters and then one by one address the concerns that were raised in each one of them, right? And those are primarily in the early part of the Spiritist Magazine, if you want to read, 1858, 59, and 60. That's about the time when the Spiritist book came together, 1857. So basically all those letters were concerning about the Spiritist book itself, right? So he was replying to them. Not only that, he allowed the individuals that wrote the letters to reply. If they replied to his reply, he would publish that one too. So there's some amazing discussions in the Spiritist Magazine that I think help us solidify and understand the rationale behind Kardec's work, right? Another thing that's I think quite interesting is that um, if you guys remember the story well, so Kardec, as a professor, right, that wrote books about methodological approach to math and science and reading, obviously very well known at that time in the community. He was part of the scientific society too. So he took a completely unbiased scientific approach to things. And I think his approach was quite interesting, and it's briefly described in the movie too, if you have a chance to watch. Because he said, the only way I have to prove that this is real is that if I take people from all over the place, if I ask the same question and the answers are the same, so the information cannot be coming from that individual because this is coming from places where people don't even know each other, right? So everywhere around the planet. And he would even get letters without asking them, right? So he would pose a question to someone in France. All of a sudden, he gets a letter from Russia that would say exactly the same thing. Now, those letters are here. So if you guys want to actually understand, what exactly was happening at that time, that's actually quite interesting too. Because if you read the Spirit's book, and obviously the books that followed, you see summaries of those answers. Basically, the answer there is like a combined effort from several answers that were along the same line. He would publish that, right, as the summary of that discussion. Some were actually not in the book exactly because there was no confirmatory replies to them, right? So he preferred to exclude all of those, and he clearly discusses that in the introduction of his book, that he would refute, right? He would not accept a million truths if one falsehood is in there, right? So he would prefer to get rid of information just to avoid the potential of having something false being published, right? So he was very strict on what he would make the cut or not to his books, right? And that can be seen here. Now, obviously, this is some of the what's published in the Spiritist Magazine, and I'll just give you an example. So this is 1 year of the Spiritist Magazine, right? So that's 1 year publication, okay? And they would be published in about 30 pages at a time every week. So that's how they compiled all the information in the Spiritist Magazine, and then they've been translated in several languages, not English yet, but I think that's something on the plans. And this one, if you know, this is from the Edisei version of it, okay? From the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. He would also, and I think also very interesting, he would bring examples of people that I would say, write about a case that happened in their city, for example, right? And I'll give an example here. So in this city, in 1858, so the first year of the magazine, he receives a letter about something that was very unusually happening at the city called Bergsenben in Germany. And if you guys know, like these letters are coming to him, right? Because he was now starting to develop this Spiritist books out there, so people know that, if you have a problem, what are you gonna do, right? Because if you go to your mayor and say, there are noises in this house, I'm pretty sure no one's gonna be there and say, well, let's study this, right? They'll probably burn the house down because there was something very unusual, right? That was happening. So they would. So what happened in that city is that there was this house with 2 little girls living on it and the family, and they would hear noises, right? I'm pretty sure if you think about this for a second, you realize that that's exactly the same thing that happened very close to us here in Hinesville in the United States, right? And they were happening about the same time, right? So it's a few years apart. And what happened in that case, the letter describes that they were able to, if the two girls or someone asked them to stop, actually the spirit would stop, right? And then they would start again, but they would reply to commands. And then they could even make music. So they would ask the spirits to, play some type of marching band style tapping, and that would actually happen, right? And then if the kids move to another house, and they've tried that, just exactly what happened in the States too, right? The first thing they tried, the sounds would follow them, right? Supporting the idea that you always need a medium of physical effects for that to happen, right? If you don't have a medium of physical effects that's capable of donating the type of materialized energy that the spirits need to make a physical action, not in this case, make a tapping or bumping sound. So that is the key element needed for that. So the spirit needed those kids, right? Those are the mediums at that time. And right after, so the story is interesting. So it's a very happy ending because it was a spirit that was able to comply with what they decided to do at the time, and things were beautiful afterwards. They were able to control their mediumship, and things move on forward. Right? We know that that's typically not the type of ending that we see in these stories, right? Because the family is persecuted, the kids are persecuted, there's a lot of pressure going on in the city, and just like what happened in the United States, the pressure can be so extreme that they would suffer a lot in their lives, they would question themselves, they would believe that they're just faking everything, media will come in and force one against the other, and like disaster strikes, right? So that's exactly what happened in the States. Not a very happy ending to those kids, right? Because of all that happened. But now, what's the interesting part of the Spiritist Magazine is not only we have a little summary of what happened, and you can find that, for example, in Heaven and Hell, right? Because you have some of those stories are made into Heaven and Hell. Okay? Oh, sorry. So, yeah, so Heaven and Hell, the second part of the book, right? So we have the classification of the spirits and talk about spirits that describe how they feel afterwards. So those are also contained, some stories like that are contained in the Spiritist Magazine. Okay? Not only have the letters, but also have a little summary discussion of, what was happening, right? So Karnak would actually describe spiritually, in the Spiritist view, the effects that were happening, right? So, for example, in the case of this city in Germany, he would actually explain because the moral development of that spirit at that time was not that high. Everyone there was able to control that spirit somehow through actions and voice. Like he would reply to commands from most people, and actually at the same time he was accepting, for example, what they suggested to him, and therefore they were able to treat that spirit and help him, right? So it gives us also that perspective of how can spiritists not only explain what happened, but also help them, right? Because actually who needed help in that case was the spirit, right? He needed help. He was going through a tough time, right? He was finding a channel of communication through untrained mediums, right? Who had this incredible mediumship of physical effects that was not understood at that time. Okay? And we still have that today, by the way, right? And I can give you an example. So one of my good friends from the States, I've been in the Spiritist movement in the States for many years, and she's now the president of one of the spirit centers in the tri-state area in the United States. And she has been treated for since she was late teen, like early teen years to early adulthood. She has been treated with medications. She's been admitted to hospital multiple times. She was diagnosed with many different psychiatric disorders. Up to a point, she met someone in one of those hospitals who was a spiritist that quickly looked at her, and he was a medium too, and said, "You know what? You have a mediumship of physical effects. You have an incredible potential in a mediumship. It hasn't been trained. Her family did not believe in any of that. Brought her to the Spirit Center. She was treated for a very, very serious obsession. She's now not only a leader in the Spiritist movement, but she doesn't have any medication or any diagnosis of psychiatric disease, right? So this is one of the examples to show you how mediumship that occurs in particular ages in a context that people do not understand what's happening can actually take a very difficult, challenging route, right? And we have many examples of that. In my family, is the same thing. My family, my sister, my older sister, even before I discovered my mediumship, she was already a medium. We had no idea what was going on. She would start moving around and talking like a 50-year-old guy. As you can imagine, a family that never seen, well, we're Catholics, we've never even thought about the idea of having that, and I wouldn't even know what was happening. When someone that is all of a sudden, in a split second, talks to you like an old gentleman and demands things from you that you have no idea what they're talking about, and bail out of the room and walk in the middle of traffic, you can probably imagine how challenging that is, right? So we had a hard time, right, until we figured that out. So it was much easier for me because I had her experience to kind of back me up. So when it started with me, I'm kind of, okay, I know what's going on, right? So, and by that time I was already in the Spirit Center, and things have been very good since then, right? But it's just the stories that you hear in the Spiritist Magazine are pretty much, you know, someone that's going through the same thing nowadays. And it's helpful because you know that, you know, a lot of people have been through that, and they're still going through it, right? And that's how I think the Spiritist Magazine can also give you like a real world examples, and that's what I like about it, right? It's exactly like what happened in most of these cases here. In my older sister, we started going to the Spirit Center, which, by the way, I had no idea what it was. I just knew that people would kind of do some sort of a prayer with the hands on top of my head kind of thing. I had no idea what a pass was, right? So, you know, I was like, I'll go there. And all of a sudden, through the mediums in that house, they were able to help the spirits that were causing the situation. The spirits were helped, and obviously she learned about mediumship, and now she practiced as a medium for many, many years, right? So she's been helping people through writing and through spiritist mediums too. Okay, so that's basically this is a little summary, right, of the Spiritist Magazine. Yes, I know that it's not realistic to say that, you know, listen, this is what you got to do now. You got to read, you know, 11 years worth of text in the next few months, and you're going to be an expert on it. No, you know, should not take the Spiritist Magazine that way, right? So I think it's an amazing amount of resources. You can. This is a type of book that you can read 2 pages and stop if you want. Okay. Because little stories, that's just like a magazine, right? Just like you go right now and buy one of those magazines out there. Like short stories with a very specific punchline, there's something to learn from them. And you take a little bit at a time, right? You don't need to go and read 200 pages at the same time. Although if you're happy about doing that, that's fantastic, but you know, you can take that small chunks, right? And I think that's something very helpful about the Spiritist Magazine. Particularly if you've already read the basic books, then you're going to fly through it, right? Now, if you haven't had a chance to read at least the Spiritist book, then it might be a little bit more challenging, right? So I would say start with the Spiritist book at least, and then you can start taking the Spiritist Magazine. Because here they're going to talk about a lot of concepts. For example, there are the Mediums book, right? About mediumship. So if you haven't had a chance to read the Mediums book, you know, it may be the time to consider reading both of them, or, you know, reading the Mediums book first. Okay. Now, so this is so I told you a little bit about the first chapter, the first years of the Spiritist Magazine, right? So the 1858 that I have here, and actually we here in the TSS we have all of them. If you want to take them to read, we can do that too. We can talk to the people at the library in the way out. Now, as you guys will probably remember, in 1869. The Spiritist Magazine continued after the discarnation of Kardec, right? And one part that I read, and I think was quite interesting too, is to understand what happened right after that. Because like, try to picture yourself back in time, right? So Kardec is here, like working like full time on this, replying on these letters, editing 5 major books, right? Spiritist Magazine, like going all over the Europe, talking about Spiritism, receiving like millions of letters, and putting this all into motion without forgetting his own meetings at the prison society and all the, like, can you imagine, like, have a think about this. Like, can you imagine that you're the only person in the far, far away that would be able to help some of these cases, right? So people will come from all over Europe to talk to him, right? This is really a challenging thing. So now all of a sudden he disgraced, right? So what happens? Right? What happened to the movement, to the letters, to the people who needed help, right? And sometimes we don't think a lot about it. In the 1869 Spiritist Magazine, pretty much summarizes all that. So it describes the letters that he received right after he discarnated, right? The speeches people would do, public speeches about him, about his life, about his work. It also describes what happened to the prison society after. So who is the new president of the society? How was it elected? They had to amend the constitution. I know maybe some of you will say, okay, this is like not very interesting, but if you understand Spiritism nowadays, you see how interesting that is, because for us to maintain a Spiritist center, obviously there's a lot of work in the spiritual world, but there's a lot of work from the workers here incarnated, right? To make sure that we're abiding by all the laws of the society. We have a registered charity. We have our bylaws. We know how to vote and decide things and move forward in the right direction, right? The work needs to keep going. Everyone is 100% volunteer, so we need to accommodate for all that. There's zero money involved in all the work, so basically everything made is just to maintain it. And how we maintain it, how do we grow spaces, do we get bigger or not, can we accommodate things like that. This happened in 1869, so what we're doing today is pretty much kind of there, right? So I feel amazing to read about that, because these are challenges that we have to go through here as a Toronto Spirit Society, but any other spiritual center, right? So how do we make sure we're doing the right thing, moving in the right direction, not deviating from Kardec, and how easy that is, right? How easy it is for us to kind of take a side road and all of a sudden be out here, right? Where the core elements of Spiritism actually that way. Do we have examples of that nowadays? Oh my goodness. Go to Facebook and find Spiritists in the Facebook. And how many of them will have a brand name now, a logo? They'll sell for their teachings online? Is that Spiritism? Like, really? If you think it is, let's talk about it, because there's a problem here. We're talking about this gentleman here that didn't even like to take a picture, right? That's why we have only one picture of him, right? That, basically sold his own stuff to pay for free classes for people who didn't have a chance to study in his own place, right? And the one element that is unisonous in every single piece of this work in any other book is that, the only way we can be really a better individual, like we grow, solidify our growth morally and spiritually, is that if we understand the needs of others and help each other. So that's the definition of charity, because it's a motion of love. Okay? So what we learn through mediumship and spiritism has to be given proportionally the same way we receive it, which is free. So and this is the problem we have today. Let's say I'm a scientist. I'm a professor, a scientist, and a clinician, right? So I can charge for my clinical work, because that's what pays my life, like what I sustain myself. But what if I read every single book of the Spiritist Magazine, and now I'm going to do a seminar online, I'm going to charge you $100 to join my seminar to talk about the Spiritist Magazine. Does that make any sense? No. If I'm doing a consult, yeah, sure. I'm 100% sure I'm going to charge for that. Okay? But the idea that we're now disseminating this new concept of not only individuals, but some societies are organizing themselves around that, it's kind of odd. Obviously, here in the Spiritist Center, there's actually a lot of physical things we have to pay for, right? Electricity, cleaning, light, water, So we need resources to do that. But as an individual, that becomes a problem. And this is all described in the Spiritist Magazine. So it is very easy for us to slide the shift away from the core elements of Spiritism. Okay? So what are the core elements? So if you summarize the core elements of Spiritism, you could probably think about charity as the really one of the core elements of it, right? So let's think about that. So let's say that is a core element, and all of a sudden you see Spiritist groups or people, individuals, people that call themselves Spiritists. All of a sudden they're going to teach you, for example, like psychological approaches to treatment of diseases, for example. That's beautiful. That's not Spiritism. I'm great people do that. That's great. But that is not Spiritism, right? You can talk about Spiritism and talk about diseases and talk about the psychology development of that. But when you bring as a psychologist, for example, if I bring an element that I use in my practice and say, well, this is Spiritism, see, we're going to use this now. That doesn't make sense, right? Like, it's just like I'm telling you, like, I'm a dentist, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to fill cavities in a Spiritist way, right? I'm going to tell you how to fill a cavity in a Spiritist way, right? It's kind of odd, isn't it? Does it sound weird? So that's why people are bringing those concepts into Spiritism, right? And all of a sudden you see them kind of being highlighted, right? By people saying, "Oh, this guy does this thing, this guy does that thing." And the more we do that, we forget about the very basics. The basics are painful. The basics, I'm going to tell you, do you really want to grow? You got to change yourself, right? You got to learn about yourself. You got to change it. You're really going to let go of all the stuff, the old you. You got to move forward. That's really what's contained in all the story. This is the hardest thing to do, by far, by a million, right? And we got to be very careful about that, right? And I'm not against any of that, by the way. It's just that there's some lines that may be crossed, right? When you're talking about that in a Spiritist context, okay? I'll give you another example, right? So there is, for example, there are people that believe that lights can help you, crystals can help you, right? Actually, Kardec talks about that many times in his, talks about magnetism and this and lights and all these alternative things that people use for help. Am I the one to judge that? Of course not. But is that Spiritism? No. Right? And going to a place that someone's going to cure you, that is not Spiritism. Because if you really understand Spiritism, how do you cure yourself? You go somewhere that someone's going to do something to you, that you're going to be a perfect person from now on? Does that work? Be careful with that. Okay? Oh, I'm a Spiritist, so I'm gonna do this thing now that they told me to do this every week for 5 weeks in a row, and I have to do this particular thing, this ritual, and do that. Is that Spiritism? Do I need a ritual, repeat things 5 times to do the same? That's exactly what Kardec told you not to do. But you see that Spiritism nowadays. Do we have, in Spiritism, do we have positions? Like, I'm a, what do people call them? Is that Spiritist? Forgot the name now. I'm a Spiritist speaker. I'm a Spiritist disseminator. I'm a Spiritist this. I'm a Spiritist lawyer. I'm a Spiritist doctor. Or be careful. Actually, there are no positions in Spiritism. So if you ask me, Marco, what are you? I'm like, I'm a worker of Spiritism. I have work. Remember André Luiz? What happened to him when he came with his title to the spirit world? What happened when he came to the spirit world and said, I'm a doctor. I'm here to help. What did he do? He cleaned the floor for many, many months. He was wiping the floor in the spiritual world with his title of a doctor. Okay? Just a splash in the face to tell you that badges, the badges that we wear to work here on earth, right? They're great. They allow us to work, but you can't use that badge to separate yourself inside spirits and say, no, now I'm a spiritist. I'm part of the medical spiritist society. I'm a medical spiritist, right? That's great. Like you can use that to study. That's beautiful. But that's not a position inside spiritism, right? And you can see now people, this amazing pieces of propaganda that I called, from people that are well-known spiritists that I publish frequently now. It's like, and they have this logo, the brand name, the beautiful pictures, studio pictures say, come join me for this amazing session online where, I'm going to start this group to study this particular thing, and they'll charge you for that. That has nothing to do with spiritism to start with. Right? The topic they're discussing has nothing to do with spiritism, right? Second of all, they're charging to teach you something they've learned in their lives that's beautiful. That's not spiritism, right? So they're not spiritists, disseminator, whatever they want to call themselves. They're not. They're just workers of spiritism, right? And in that moment in time, he's not being really a spiritist. He's just being his own profession. I don't know what that is, right? Be careful. It's very easy to follow that. And because we've been taught how to do that our entire lives, we create it as we create them as idols, right? Oh, this individual, he's amazing. If you think about spiritism, I think about one person. It happens to us, right? Oh, that spirit speaker, oh, these guys are amazing. And they are, most of them are really amazing spirits, right? But we gotta be careful with this idolatry, right? The idea that we've learned how to do that through many incarnations, okay? And in Spiritism, the basic fact of Spiritism is that we are all the same. Take it from the one who taught us, this guy. So this is what I do now. So every time I see something that I'm like, okay, that sounds strange, this is what I ask. So what Kardec would probably do in that scenario? That's what I do. It's an interesting exercise. Try to do that, right? And then try to do that, and just you have a better feeling of, does that make sense or not inside Spiritism, right? So I have a lot. So I remember when I came to North America in general, to both to the States and to Canada. I remember many individuals coming to the Spirit Center, and by the time I was already doing studies of the gospel, because actually what I like the most is actually the gospel to study and to discuss. So I was doing gospel studies, and then a lot of individuals would come and say, I'm here to learn about Spiritism, and when is this session about me, when something's going to happen, right? Because nothing's happening, right? So I come here, we just talk about stuff, and then nothing happens, right? So I want someone to come here and do something. And if you're doing the pass, you got to move your hands really fast, because you don't do that. Like your pass is horrible. Like that pass, the guy that just puts a hand. I don't want to sleep with that guy, right? Do the pass and the other guy. We need that, right? As we kind of need something to happen. Others would come and say, I enjoy coming here, but don't you guys have a cure session? And I'm like, actually, you're running one right now. The gospel studies, that's the cure session. You want to read the cure? Like, really? It's here? Oh, no, but you lay on, you do something, then close your eyes, and then kind of this. No, that's not happening. Sorry. Do we have mediums with the capacity to cure? 100% we do, and it's all here. We can hear about that, right? And that's beautiful. Can we have those individuals working in Spiritism? 100% yes. But is that the core elements of what we do? No. Okay? And they're here for a reason too, right? They're here to learn a lot of stuff. We have examples that happen in Brazil. Remember that? Yeah. So talk about fascination, eh? Like let your own instincts as a human being take over a gift that you received that you completely threw in the garbage now because, allowed other things to happen. And do we have participation in that? We do. right? Because we idolize people that do that. The more we do it, the more we take them down. Think about a very well-known spiritist anywhere in the world. Think how many people would come and say, "Oh my God, you're like a half the God." The more people do that, the more you take that individual down if he's not strong enough, right? Because that energy that we project is actually the same energy that will fascinate them and then pull them away from spiritism, right? Be careful, we have a role in this, right? And everything that I'm saying here, there are examples in Spiritist Magazine. You can find it. You can find Spiritist Magazine, for example, it's of mediums that completely failed their jobs. Not only, so we have that in André Louis' books, right? The Missionaries of Light. We have the Workers of the Life Eternal, right? We have those examples. Now we have here too in the Spiritist Magazine mediums that, and we have, at least one example in the movie too, right? Where there's this challenge between the work as a medium and being recognized for it. Remember, like one of the mediums that worked with Kazakh? That happens to today, the same thing, right? And the more people think that a medium is someone spectacular, the higher the chance of that medium being in trouble, right? Because he now has to fight that too. It's a very strong fascination, right? And they can fall quite easily. And we have a role into that. So, nowadays we're kind of in a strange era of spiritism, and the reason why I'm bringing all that because all this contained in this book, in the Spiritist Magazine. There are examples of that. So it's not new. It happened many years ago, 150 years ago. Same thing was happening, right? That, for example, we're going to have this massive Spiritist meeting somewhere in the world, and but I only go if this guy goes. How many times did I hear that? Unfortunately, I lost count. Okay. But this guy, he's not coming. I don't think he's gonna go. What is that? Seriously, what is that? I don't understand. So I'm sure they're great speakers in Spiritism, and I'm not one of them, but I think there are amazing people out there. They're fantastic speakers in Spiritism, right? But the fact that we identify them not as a spiritist worker and a human being just like me, and and all of a sudden I create a situation where I only go if this one individual goes. That's odd. So that tells you to have a lot to work. You have a lot to study, right? Even before going to the meeting. So you know what I reply? This is my reply. It's like, yeah, I don't think you should go. You're absolutely right. This is what I think you should do. Let me show you. Get this book, okay? Take this home. How about you read more about this, right? So instead of going to the meeting, let's study this, right? And if this is not enough, right? This is not enough, okay? Take this, okay? Study this guy, but study again, because I don't think you understand it, right? And then after you go through all this, then sure enough, you're going to go to the meeting. But I'm pretty sure you're going to go in a very different state of mind. Okay, and I can tell you that. Okay? So, but see, we are trained to do that stuff, right? We've got to be very careful with that in Spiritism. Okay? I've seen Spiritist Center collapse 100% because of little things that happen over a long period of time, right? One medium comes in and decides to do one particular session of this or that, and then people start to come for that, and then this idolization of, this center is amazing because they do this stuff. So I'm not going to go to that center that only talks about gospel because that's boring, right? I'm going to go to the center where there's going to have this amazing shift of lights. Light's going to turn red. Someone's going to say this, and all of a sudden they're going to say in the end, you're cured, you had a surgery, get out of here, right? That's beautiful. That's not Spiritism. Okay? All right. So without staying here for half an hour ranting about that, I'm going to just finish with a few interesting topics on the Spiritist Magazine. So in the last year of this particular, but remember, this is still published. We have the Spiritist Magazine in the States that is published by the Vanessa Saloni. My good friend in the States is the chief editor of the Spiritist Magazine today in the States. And they're similar to the originals here. It's just like short stories about different things that are brought together in the magazine. we still had this the Spiritist Magazine published by the Brazilian Federation for many years after that. But again, just slightly different. This is the original ones, right? That's the one I'm focusing on today. So in 1869, Kardec talks about what did the Spiritists look like at that time, right? So in general, the population that were considered themselves Spiritists. Okay? So you're going to find quite a few interesting things. So 50% of Spiritists in 1869 or late 68 were actually Catholics, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense because he's in France. And what's the percentage of Catholics at that time? Right, pretty much 100% of the population, like 98%. But 50% of them consider themselves Catholics. Okay, so the second most common profession to be declared themselves Spiritists is actually engineers. Right, and the third one, priests. Amazing. So 70% were male, 30% female. And the reason why he did that, because many people believe that he was preaching on females that had problems with family and stuff, and they were going through a hard time, and then all of a sudden they were able to convince them that Spiritism was real, right? So that's why he did that work. I don't know how it looks like nowadays, but I'll believe it's close to 50%. Okay, so France was the #1 place. So he was judging this by the number of letters you see, right? Or like the letters that people say that they're Spiritists. #4 was Russia, right? And I found that's quite interesting, right? And there are actually many of them here contain the Spiritist Magazine, right? And then comes other places like England and Greece after that. Greece in #9, actually. So also some interesting facts. He looked at overall income, like he's a scientist, right? So he does that type of like an analytics, right? He looked at different incomes, professions, and reasons why they decided to join Spiritism. He actually does a survey on that. And what I find interesting is that, for example, in his survey, he defines in the end that by far the most common causes why someone will come to Spiritism is that afflictions and suffering. Does that sound reasonable today? I think so, right? Still, like, some of it will be part of it, okay? But one thing that he summarizes that, and I think that's the most important part, is that he would say, after doing all that, like, you know, which percentage of engineers and lawyers and scholars and professors and all that, so he would summarize all that and say, in the end, all of these people here, and all of them, are united in the common goal of improving themselves. So in a way, we have a common ground that everyone is the same, including myself. So he puts himself in that same situation scenario. Now, how humble is that from someone who's actually came up with this entire thing? Right? And that's why I see Spiritism today, is that we got to be very careful, because before we find and follow these amazing new things and constellations and this and that, which are great, we have to remind ourselves of what we're doing here. Basics. Okay? Love one another. You know, how you demonstrate you're a great Spiritist, not by a badge or by your new logo that looks amazing on Facebook, or not by your beautiful published material that you have now, this splashy publications, is actually by the efforts you're making to be a better person. Okay? So when you look at a movie about Divaldo, for example, you can take some sense of that, right? Because look at what he's done in his life, the efforts he's made to be what he is today, right? When you look at the story of Divaldo, of Chico, you get a good sense of that too, like the efforts that he made to do what he's done, right? Now you should take everyone the same. So when you look at someone up online and say, you know, this is the individual coming, I'm going to follow this guy, like what are the efforts they're making? You can make that decision, I'm pretty sure, right? And you should take that in consideration. Okay? So thank you all. I hope you guys had a tiny little summary of what the Spiritist Magazine is, and I highly recommend you guys at least there's online to this PDFs online you can find online. Okay, if you guys want to read. Just take a few pages at a time, and you guys have a lot of fun. I can guarantee you that. Okay? Any questions? No? No questions? Okay. Perfect. So we're going to open for questions now, right? If you guys have any comments or questions. And after that, we're going to prepare for the passes. Okay? All right. Any questions? Yes?
Why do you think there is not many spiritists in France right now, or in Europe in general?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I think there are many reasons for that. So there's no one answer that I'm going to say, well, this is what happened, kind of thing, right? But the primary concern about the Spiritist movement kind of collapsing or fading, right, into some of these countries is a combination of, and some of it is in the 1869 version here, is that how they were able to maintain their core elements of Spiritism and solidify it around them. So because think about this, when things are, so most people at that time wouldn't even have read those books, right? Because they were published like a year ago, right? So in the very beginning, the only way they could maintain their core beliefs, right, is that if the societies at that time were really strict about, okay, what we're going to define Spiritism as. Okay? And that unfortunately did not happen in many cases. So they started to accommodate things, right? So for example, the magnetism at that time was something live and real, right? But then because magnetism was highly criticized scientifically, that splashed over everyone in Spiritism that had also principles of magnetism incorporated in their practice, right? So if you were Spiritist and then you believed a lot and you worked a lot on physical manifestation of things, there was heavily criticism at that time by the scientific community against, for example, spirits showing up and sounds and this. So you got splashed over by that criticism, and then you may collapse, because if that's the core of your element, so if you're here because things are going to bang in the wall, if there's no banging, if someone tells you that the banging is not real, what do? You're out, right? Obviously, many of the mediums that participated here were obsessed afterwards, were fascinated, and actually came back and said, hey, yeah, that's not real. That takes away the mediumistic part of Spiritism. So who survived? The ones that focus on this guy. So this was the binding element, the gospel part, like the core elements, right? What do you do to help others and yourself and grow and be a good person? So, and Kardec, if you read carefully, and I invite you to read again his work, he's going to say that all the time. It's actually the preface of the Spirits book, the introduction. It's all about, you can ignore anything about the story of Jesus. If you just remember one thing he said, right? Which is like, you have to do unto others what you want people to do unto you. If you remember that, because that's the core element. And he even said, because people will criticize him, right? They'll criticize him for everything. If he said something, they will criticize. So if your focus is on things that are highly criticizable elsewhere, then you would fade away. And in the societies that were very rationalized in general, that was an easy trap, right? So where did it spread? It spread in places where the faith in general, like the core elements of faith in Catholicism, for example, were maintained, like in Brazil and Central America, right? So in places where people believe heavily in more core elements, right, of that thing. And then, obviously, if you want to read more about it, there's Brazil, the Padre do Evangelho, you can read, it's not translated yet, but you can read about it. Why, for example, the spirits in the higher realm decided to continue propagate that in Brazil, for example, because there was a context for that, right? And that's why it kind of slowly chipped away in other places. Right? But it's not, there's no one answer, so there's a lot of context that happens. Yes. Any more comments? No? Okay. All right, so now we're going to get ready for the passes. And so we're going to say bye to my friends there and connected with us. Thank you very much for joining. And I hope you guys can continue joining us for our studies and for our lectures on Sundays. So the passes are a transfusion of good energies, basically, right? So nothing mystical, nothing unusual. We will dim the lights just to help us focus and concentrate. But if you want to do the Pass with the lights on, that's not going to make a zero difference to what we're doing, right? There's no position things, rituals, movements that we do. Every person does it differently, and that's fine. The end result's pretty much the same, right? So let's focus now on really where this energy is all coming from our Creator, God, Father, Mother, God, and the one who taught us a lot about what we need to do, which is Jesus. Okay, so let's elevate our thoughts and get ready for the classes. So.